All right. So, anyone else do a double take when they saw the news about Dr. Oz?
You mean Dr. Oz from like
Yeah.
daytime TV?
The guy who's telling us about, miracle weight loss cures and what like pomegranate juice can do for you. Now he's running Medicare. It's um, it's a bit of a head scratcher, to be
Yeah,
honest.
no kidding.
So, like, how did we get here?
Well, most people know him from TV, right?
Right.
But his story, it goes way back, actually, through medicine, television, and even politics.
That's what I find so fascinating. He's this heart surgeon,
Uh-huh.
a professor at Columbia, but also like this TV celebrity who's been called out for, well, let's just say questionable health advice.
Yeah.
So how do those pieces fit together?
It's complicated for sure.
Mhm.
But let's start with his education. I mean, the guy went to Harvard, then he went to the University of Pennsylvania, got his MD and an MBA there.
Wow. Okay, so we're not talking about some, quack who bought a degree online.
Not at all. He was a pioneer in like certain surgical techniques and, he held a super prestigious position at Columbia for years.
So he's the real deal, medically speaking.
Yeah. But even early on, there were signs that he wasn't afraid to, kind of push the boundaries of traditional medicine.
Oh, like what?
Well, back in 1995, he co-founded this place called the Cardiac Complementary Care Center. And they integrated, they integrated alternative therapies, stuff like therapeutic touch.
Wait, a therapeutic touch, like where someone just kind of waves their hands over you?
Exactly. And, well, it didn't go over well with everyone.
I can imagine. So what happened?
There was friction with the hospital administration, and he eventually, stopped using it. But it shows, even way back then, he was open to these less conventional ideas.
Interesting. So that's the early hint.
Right. Then in 2003, there was this whole incident with the American Association for Thoracic Surgery.
Oh, yeah. I remember reading about that. His research presentation got pulled, and he was, barred for a couple of years.
2 years, yeah. Officially, it was because of concerns about changes he made to his research methods, like mid-study. But unofficially, well, let's just say people were questioning the rigor of his research, concerns about sample size, the validity of his conclusions, that kind of thing.
So maybe it's a bit of a pattern emerging here. A brilliant guy, top-notch education, but also a tendency to maybe cut corners or embrace ideas that are a little out there.
It's possible, and it's interesting because this kind of foreshadows the criticism he faces later on, especially with all the medical advice he was giving out on his TV show.
Right, because that's where things get really wild. I mean,
That.
we're talking fellow doctors, medical journals, even a Senate committee calling him out for pushing iffy health products and advice. It's a far cry from, Dr. Oz, the Ivy League
Yeah.
heart surgeon, right?
Totally. In 2014, he ends up in front of the Senate committee that's investigating consumer fraud, specifically related to weight loss products. And Senator Claire McCaskill, she was grilling him, basically saying that the scientific community is almost monolithic against you.
Oof, that's gotta sting.
Yeah. And it's not just a one-off thing. There was that study in the British Medical Journal.
Right. They looked at his show and basically said a lot of what he was recommending wasn't backed up by evidence.
Exactly. They analyzed a bunch of recommendations from the Dr. Oz show, found that more than half were either contradicted by the science or there was just like no evidence at all.
Wow, over half.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example? What kind of stuff are we talking about here?
Well, there was that time he said apple juice had like dangerous levels of arsenic.
Seriously?
Yeah, which turned out to be false. And another time he suggested a link between cell phone use and breast cancer.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that.
And again, totally not supported by, the scientific consensus.
Okay, so we have this kind of complicated picture emerging here.
Mhm.
Brilliant guy, prestigious medical background, but also this willingness to say and do things that are, well, let's just say outside the mainstream. And now this guy's in charge of Medicare.
It's a real head scratcher, that's for sure. It's funny when you dig into his views on healthcare, they've kind of like changed over time.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, like earlier in his career, he seemed pretty supportive of a bigger role for the government in healthcare. Even said he thought health coverage should be mandatory for all Americans.
That's interesting. That sounds pretty progressive for someone who ends up, aligning himself with the Republican Party.
Yeah, right. Like back in 2009, he even said that if someone couldn't afford health coverage, quote, "We have to give it to you."
Whoa, hold on. Seriously?
Yeah, and he even appeared in this ad supporting the Affordable Care Act. which, most Republicans were totally against at the time.
That's wild. So he was basically endorsing Obamacare.
Pretty much. And it wasn't just that. He used to talk about those universal healthcare systems in Europe, like in Germany and Switzerland. He'd hold them up as like models.
So it seems like he was, at least at one point, really into making sure everyone had health care, regardless of whether they could pay for it.
Yeah, exactly. But then something changed.
Right, because now he's talking about repealing the Affordable Care Act and, what was it, Medicare Advantage Plus?
Yep, Medicare Advantage Plus, which is basically all about giving private insurers a bigger role in Medicare.
So less government, more private companies. That seems like a pretty big shift. And, given his history with promoting products that might have benefited him financially, it makes you wonder.
Yeah, it's definitely something to watch. And his whole thing about healthcare being a, quote, right to access and not a fundamental right, that distinction is kind of worrisome.
Yeah, what does that even mean for, how Medicare works, who gets covered, what's considered essential?
Exactly. Those are huge questions for the millions of seniors who rely on Medicare.
Right. It's not just like some abstract policy debate. This is people's lives. Okay, so healthcare is a big one. But what about social issues?
Oh, yeah, those are a whole other can of worms. Like, take his stance on abortion. That was like a huge flashpoint during his Senate run.
Totally. I remember that. Went from supporting abortion rights to like full on opposing it, right?
Exactly. And early on, he was even talking about how he'd seen the consequences of illegal abortions during his medical training. Really powerful stuff. But then during his campaign, he completely flips, goes hardline anti-abortion, aligns himself with, the whole movement.
And didn't he even call abortion murder at one point?
He did, which, caused a ton of outrage and debate.
Rightfully so, I'd say. It's scary to think that someone's personal beliefs, especially when they've been so like back and forth, could actually affect Medicare.
Right. Like, will he decide that some procedures or services aren't covered just because he doesn't agree with them morally? It's chilling thought.
It really is. It makes you question, how deeply held his convictions really are. Is he actually going to put the needs of Medicare beneficiaries first? Or is there, maybe another agenda at play here?
And it's not just abortion. His views on climate change, China, even gun control, they've all kind of shifted over time, often in ways that, well, let's just say they line up pretty neatly with, like, classic Republican talking points.
Right, almost like he's adjusting his positions to fit in with, whatever crowd he's trying to appeal to at the moment. It's not exactly reassuring.
Exactly. So, how do we trust that he's going to make decisions about Medicare based on, like, actual evidence and good policy? Or will it just be about politics and, what's going to benefit him?
Okay, so we've got this really, really complex picture of the guy now. Super smart, obviously,
Wow.
not afraid to challenge the status quo, but also kind of prone to flip-flopping and maybe, not always putting patients first. And now he's in charge of Medicare. It's a lot to process. So where do we go from here? What do we do with all this information? Okay, so we spent like 2 whole parts of this deep dive getting to know Dr. Oz, the surgeon,
Hmm.
the TV guy,
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
politician. But like the big question is, what does all this mean for Medicare with him, running the whole thing?
It's the question, right? And I don't think anyone has a clear answer, but we can look at his track record, see if there are any clues there, and maybe more importantly, figure out what questions we should be asking going forward.
Right. So, like, first and foremost, how much of Dr. Oz, the TV personality, are we going to see in his role as, the head of Medicare? Will it be all, personal responsibility and quick fixes, and maybe even some of those less conventional health ideas he was pushing on his show?
That's a big concern for sure, because, Medicare, it's about real complicated health problems. Seniors dealing with, serious stuff, often needing long-term care. It's not like, finding a miracle berry or whatever.
So is he going to, like, get that? Or will he try to oversimplify things? Like,
Yeah.
just telling people to change their lifestyle and everything will be fine.
We'll have to see. But that's definitely something to watch for. And, another red flag, his history with those products, the ones with iffy science behind them. How's he going to handle all the lobbyists? All the drug companies, the people pushing alternative therapies, they're all going to want a piece of the Medicare pie.
Oh, for sure. And knowing him, he might be swayed by a good story, even if the evidence isn't really there.
Right. We've seen him, kind of fall for those compelling narratives before, even if they're not, like, totally rigorous scientifically. So will his decisions about Medicare be based on, hard data? Or will he be influenced by who's got the best sales pitch?
Man, that's scary. And there's, the whole thing about his views on social issues, like abortion. Could those beliefs, his personal beliefs, could they affect what Medicare covers,
Hmm.
like reproductive health services, end of life care?
It's a legitimate question, especially given how much he's, changed his stance on that issue over the years. It makes you wonder if in some cases his ideology might, overlay medical necessity.
That's a disturbing thought,
Mm.
that someone's personal beliefs could actually dictate, like, what kind of health care people can get,
Hmm.
especially when we're talking about something as important as Medicare.
Right, it's not something to take lightly. And then there's the whole question of, commitment. When he was running for Senate in Pennsylvania, a lot of people questioned whether he was really, like, rooted there or if he was just, passing through.
Yeah, that whole carpetbagger thing.
Exactly. So how invested is he really in Medicare, in the long-term health of the program, and, in the well-being of the people who rely on it? Is this a true commitment, or is it, maybe a stepping stone to something else?
So many questions. And honestly, it's kind of scary. It feels like we're just, waiting to see what happens. Like, will Dr. Oz be good for Medicare? Or will he, wreck the whole thing?
I get it. It's easy to get caught up in all the drama and the what ifs. But, the goal here isn't to predict the future. It's not about scaring people. It's about giving you, the listener, the information you need to make up your own mind, to think critically about what's going on.
I like that. Informed skepticism, not just like blind faith or panic. We've given you the facts, laid out the complexities, showed you where the potential problems might be. But now it's up to you. Stay informed, ask questions, and, hold the people in power accountable.
Exactly. That's what it means to be an engaged citizen. Question things, analyze, demand transparency, and, insist that decisions are based on evidence. Whether Dr. Oz's time at Medicare will be a success or a disaster, well, only time will tell. But the only way to know is to pay attention and to engage with the process.
Well said. And on that note, I think we're going to wrap up this deep dive into the world of Dr. Oz and his surprising journey to the top of Medicare. Thanks for joining us. And remember, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions.
I couldn't have said it better myself. The future of Medicare and really healthcare for all of us depends on it.